Some people don't become monsters because they enjoy evil. They become monsters because they believe they're right. And that's what makes Death Note so unsettling. Not the notebook. Not the killings. Not even Light Yagami himself. It's the terrifying possibility that, under the right circumstances, morality can slowly start to feel optional, especially when your intentions sound noble. Because Light never sees himself as a villain. He sees himself as justice. And if we're being honest, that's the part that stays with people long after the series ends. At the beginning of the story, Light is almost painfully ordinary emotionally. Intelligent, disciplined, admired by everyone around him, but internally detached from the world. He looks at society and sees corruption, violence, selfishness, decay. Criminals escape consequences. Innocent people suffer. The system feels weak. Then one day, he finds the Death Note. A notebook that allows him to kill anyone whose name and face he knows. And the important thing isn't that Light gains power. It's what happens psychologically the moment he believes he deserves to use it. Because that's not what this story is really about. Light Yagami is not simply a genius becoming evil. He's a person slowly replacing morality with certainty. And there's a difference. One of the earliest scenes that quietly defines the entire series happens after Light uses the notebook for the first time. At face value, the moment is simple. He panics. He questions whether the notebook is real. Then he tests it again. Another person dies. But psychologically, something much deeper is happening. The second kill matters more than the first. Because the first one could still be framed as shock. Curiosity. Accident. Emotional confusion. The second one is a decision. And after that decision, Light faces a psychological problem every human being understands. Instinctively, if I did something terrible, what kind of person does that make me? Most people, when confronted with guilt, either stop, or admit they crossed a line. Light does something else. He rewrites the line. Instead of accepting that he committed murder, he creates a new moral framework where murder becomes justice. Criminals become necessary sacrifices. Fear becomes social cleansing. His actions become destiny. This is one of the most psychologically accurate things in the entire series. Human beings are incredibly good at adapting their morality to protect their self-image. Very few people wake up thinking they're the villain. They reinterpret their actions until they can still live with themselves. And that's exactly what Light does. Not all at once. Slowly. Rationally. Convincingly. Which is why it feels disturbingly believable. Then the series introduces L. And suddenly the story becomes something much more interesting than a battle between good and evil. It becomes a war between two different ideas of justice. On screen, L is trying to catch a mass murderer. That's the literal conflict. But emotionally, L represents something Light cannot tolerate: uncertainty. L doesn't believe any person should possess absolute authority over life and death. He operates through doubt, investigation, evidence, probability. His methods are strange, obsessive, sometimes morally questionable, but he fundamentally accepts a limitation Light refuses to accept: that humans are flawed. And that limitation matters. Because once someone believes they are uniquely qualified to decide who deserves to live, morality stops being morality. It becomes ego. There's a scene where Light begins enjoying the chase with L more than his supposed mission of creating a better world. And that's the moment the series quietly changes. Because the killings stop being about justice. Now they're about identity. Light no longer kills only to cleanse evil. He kills to protect the version of himself he's become. And most viewers feel this shift before they consciously understand it. The notebook gave Light power. But the real addiction was superiority. The feeling of standing above everyone else. The feeling of being untouchable. This is why Death Note resonates so deeply with people even outside anime culture. Because most people have experienced a smaller version of Light's psychology. Not murder. Not domination. But self-justification. Maybe you hurt someone and convinced yourself they deserved it. Maybe you stayed in control because vulnerability felt dangerous. Maybe your need to be right became more important than being honest. The difficult part is admitting this applies to you too. The series exaggerates these impulses to an extreme degree, but the emotional mechanism underneath them is painfully human. Light's tragedy is not that he loses his morality instantly. It's that every compromise feels reasonable when viewed one step at a time. That's how people drift. Not through one catastrophic decision, but through gradual permission. Another crucial scene happens when Light temporarily loses ownership of the Death Note and forgets everything he's done. And suddenly, he becomes human again. Calmer. More empathetic. More cooperative. Less consumed by control. At face value, the story uses this as a clever narrative device. Psychologically, though, it reveals something devastating. Light was not born evil. He became psychologically reshaped by unchecked power and constant rationalization. And that distinction matters because it challenges a comforting belief many people hold about morality, the idea that good and evil are fixed identities. But real life is rarely that clean. Most people are not permanently good or permanently corrupt. People adapt to environments. To incentives. To fear. To power. To isolation. And one of the scariest ideas in the series is that morality is often less stable than we want to believe. Especially when no one can stop us. Then there's Ryuk. The character many viewers initially treat as comic relief. But Ryuk may actually be the most important figure in the story. Because Ryuk has no ideology. No moral agenda. No emotional investment in humanity. He watches everything unfold purely for entertainment. And psychologically, Ryuk represents something uncomfortable, the indifference of the universe. Light desperately wants his actions to mean something. He wants to become a god. He wants history to validate him. He wants the world to transform around his will. Ryuk just wants amusement. That contrast completely changes the emotional tone of the story. Because it reveals how much of Light's crusade is built on ego-driven meaning. The universe itself never confirms that Light is righteous. Only Light does. And eventually, even the people closest to him become tools. That's the final stage of moral corruption in the series. Not violence. Dehumanization. The inability to see other people as fully real once they stop serving your narrative. One of the saddest moments in the entire show happens near the end, when Light is finally exposed. Not because he's caught. But because of how desperately human he suddenly becomes. For most of the series, Light presents himself as composed, superior, almost godlike. But the second his illusion collapses, fear takes over instantly. He begs. Panics. Rationalizes. Denies. And it's tragic because we realize something important. Light spent so long trying to become a god that he forgot he was still a person. A frightened, insecure person. That's what makes his downfall emotionally powerful instead of simply satisfying. Underneath all the manipulation and cruelty was someone terrified of losing control. And most people understand that feeling more than they want to admit. Because control is comforting. Moral certainty is comforting. Believing you are right about everything is comforting. It removes ambiguity. Doubt. Responsibility. Vulnerability. But real morality is uncomfortable. Real justice requires humility. It requires accepting that no individual sees the full picture clearly enough to play God over everyone else. And that may be the central lesson of Death Note: the moment justice becomes completely detached from empathy, it stops being justice. It becomes domination wearing moral language. What makes the series timeless is that it refuses to give viewers an easy answer. L isn't perfectly moral. Light isn't pure evil. The legal system isn't flawless. Society itself is messy and unfair. And that complexity is exactly why the story feels psychologically real. Because real morality is exhausting. There are no perfect systems. No perfect people. No perfectly objective decisions. Only flawed humans trying to create order while wrestling with their own ego, fear, and desire for control. And maybe that's why people remain obsessed with this story years later. Not because they fantasize about the notebook itself. But because the series forces viewers into an uncomfortable question: if I had the power to reshape the world, how long would it take before I convinced myself I had the right to? That question lingers because there's no safe answer. Only honesty. In the end, Light Yagami doesn't fail because he lacked intelligence. He fails because he stopped questioning himself. And when a person loses the ability to doubt their own righteousness, almost anything becomes justifiable. That's the real horror of the story. Not death. Certainty. If this story stayed with you, you should explore Monster next. Because where death